In June 2016, Universal Pictures released what they believed would be their next billion-dollar franchise. Warcraft carried a staggering $160 million budget, the full backing of Legendary Entertainment, and the passionate vision of acclaimed director Duncan Jones. The studio had every reason to feel confident. Millions of gamers worldwide knew this universe. Fantasy epics were dominating theaters, and Jones had proven his sci-fi credentials with Moon and Source Code. But even the best laid plans don't always work out. Warcraft earned just $47.4 million domestically, becoming one of the summer's most spectacular disappointments. Critics called it incoherent. Audiences stayed away. The planned franchise died before the first film finished its theatrical run. Yet something strange happened in the aftermath. While studio executives wrote off their losses, fans began discovering a different movie, one buried beneath studio interference and marketing missteps. Today, Warcraft exists as both a cautionary tale about franchise ambition and an unlikely cult classic that dared to take video game source material seriously. Maybe too seriously. This is the story of how a $160 million film destroyed a franchise before it began, then found new life as the ambitious misfire that almost worked. But before we get to all of that, let's set the stage, shall we? By 2013, Hollywood had cracked the code on fantasy blockbusters. Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy had proven that audiences would embrace epic storytelling and complex world building. The Marvel Cinematic Universe demonstrated how interconnected franchises could generate billions, and Game of Thrones was making fantasy television appointment viewing. Every studio wanted their own Middle-earth, their own shared universe. And it turns out Legendary Entertainment thought they'd found theirs in Azeroth. Warcraft represented more than just another video game adaptation. This was Legendary's attempt to launch a multimedia empire built around Blizzard Entertainment's wildly popular, massively multiplayer online role-playing game. The numbers seemed bulletproof. World of Warcraft alone had generated over 100 million registered accounts since its launch back in 2004. The broader Warcraft universe encompassed real-time strategy games, books, comics, and merchandise. If even a fraction of those fans bought tickets, success was pretty much guaranteed. Duncan Jones, meanwhile, seemed like the perfect director to break the video game adaptation curse. His film Moon had earned critical acclaim for its thoughtful approach to science fiction. Source Code proved he could handle bigger budgets while maintaining character focus. Jones wasn't just a hired gun, he was a genuine Warcraft fan who understood the source material's appeal and wanted to bring that same depth to cinema. The production scale matched the ambition. Legendary committed to cutting-edge motion capture technology that would bring the orc characters to life with unprecedented realism. Massive practical sets recreated iconic locations from the games. The visual effects pipeline rivaled anything attempted for Lord of the Rings or Avatar. This wasn't going to be just another cheap cash grab. Warcraft was designed to prove that video game adaptations could be prestige entertainment. The film's casting reflected this serious approach. Ben Foster, Dominic Cooper, and Ruth Negga brought a dramatic credibility to the human characters. Paula Patton took on the challenging role of Garona, requiring both dramatic performance and extensive makeup effects. The orc characters would be portrayed by respected motion capture performers, with voices provided by actors like Clancy Brown and Daniel Wu. Jones envisioned Warcraft as operatic fantasy that would blend the political intrigue of Game of Thrones with the visual spectacle of films like Avatar. The feature would take its mythology seriously, respecting both the source material and audience's intelligence. There would be no dumbed-down explanations or winking self-awareness. This would be earnest epic fantasy that happened to be based on a video game. At any rate, the budget kept climbing. Visual effects required constant refinement. The motion capture technology pushed boundaries but demanded time and resources. By the time cameras rolled, Warcraft had become one of the most expensive films ever produced, with expectations to match. Universal and Legendary weren't just making a movie, they were launching what they hoped would become their answer to Star Wars. But what they got instead was something far more complicated. Warcraft's fundamental problem wasn't its ambition, it was trying to serve too many masters at once. Jones had crafted a story that attempted to balance orc clan politics, human kingdom intrigue, magical corruption, interdimensional warfare, and personal character arcs across multiple species and factions. What emerged was less a focused narrative than a collision of several different movies fighting for screen time. The human storyline followed Anduin Lothar, a knight investigating strange attacks on the Kingdom of Stormwind. Meanwhile, the orc narrative centered on Duratan, a clan chieftain questioning his people's invasion of a new world. Garona existed between both stories as a half-orc caught between loyalties. The wizard Medivh harbored dark secrets about the magical corruption enabling the invasion. Each thread could have supported its own film, but crammed together, they created a narrative traffic jam. Jones wanted to give equal weight to both sides of the conflict, making the orcs sympathetic protagonists rather than mindless villains. This approach worked brilliantly in the source material, where players could experience stories from multiple perspectives across different games and factions. But cinema demands clearer focus. Audiences needed someone to root for, and Warcraft kept shifting between viewpoints without establishing clear emotional anchors. The character development suffered the most. Lothar, played by Travis Fimmel, should have been the human heart of the story, but his arc kept getting sidelined for exposition about magical portals and clan politics. Garona's internal conflict between her orc heritage and human sympathies never received the development it deserved. Medivh's corruption by dark magic felt rushed, his fall from mentor to villain happening too quickly to carry proper dramatic weight. Compare this to contemporary fantasy successes. Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy, for all its flaws, maintained clear focus on Bilbo's journey. Game of Thrones might have juggled multiple storylines and given us a terrible ending, but each episode could develop characters and advance plots with television's luxury of time. Warcraft tried to compress an entire season's worth of character development into 2 hours, and it was pretty much doomed from the start. Production struggles made these narrative problems worse. Visual effects delays forced constant script revisions. The balance between practical sets and CGI environments kept shifting as budget reality set in. Rumored studio interference led to significant cuts, including the oft-discussed 40 minutes of removed footage that would have helped with character development and plot clarity. The motion capture work, while technically impressive, created its own challenges. Scenes between human actors and CGI orcs required complex choreography and multiple takes. The orc performances, led by Toby Kebbell as Duratan, delivered genuine emotion through technology, but the process slowed production and limited spontaneous character moments. Marketing then amplified the confusion. Trailers struggled to explain what Warcraft actually was. Epic fantasy, video game spectacle, political drama. The advertising defaulted to generic fantasy imagery that could have promoted any sword and sorcery film. Posters emphasized action over character, spectacle over story. Audiences expecting straightforward fantasy adventure found themselves watching something more complex and demanding. Critics reacted harshly to this narrative density. The film's refusal to simplify its mythology for mainstream audiences became a liability rather than a strength. As someone who played WoW obsessively through Wrath of the Lich King and was familiar with the lore, I can't even imagine how a casual viewer made sense of all these plot threads. The editing reflected these competing pressures. Scenes jumped between locations and storylines without adequate setup. Character motivations remained unclear because their development happened in cut footage. The climactic battle, while visually spectacular, felt disconnected from the emotional stakes because the relationships driving it hadn't been properly established. Jones later admitted in interviews that he'd been forced to choose between character development and spectacle, ultimately sacrificing the former to meet runtime requirements. The director's original vision included more time with both human and orc families, deeper exploration of the magical corruption theme, and clearer motivation for key character decisions. What emerged was a film caught between its creator's artistic ambitions and commercial demands. It was a film too complex for casual audiences, too truncated for fans, too serious for popcorn entertainment, yet too action-heavy for character drama. Warcraft became a fascinating failure, a movie that almost worked but collapsed under the weight of trying to be everything to everyone. When Warcraft opened in theaters on June 10, 2016, it faced a summer lineup that would have challenged even the most polished blockbuster. Captain America: Civil War was still dominating screens in its 4th week. Finding Dory would arrive the following weekend to massive family audiences. X-Men Apocalypse had disappointed, but was still taking up a lot of theater real estate. Into this crowded marketplace, Universal launched their $160 million gamble with cautious optimism and mounting dread. The opening weekend numbers told a brutal story. Warcraft earned just $24.4 million domestically, landing in 2nd place behind The Conjuring 2. For a film carrying blockbuster expectations and franchise ambitions, this represented an unmitigated disaster. Against a production budget of $160 million, plus marketing costs estimated at another $100 million, the film needed to earn more than $400 million worldwide to just break even. The domestic failure meant that burden fell entirely on international markets, a precarious position for any would-be franchise. All was not lost though, because international markets provided some hope. China embraced the film enthusiastically, generating $220 million in box office revenue. European audiences responded more favorably than their American counterparts, pushing the worldwide total to $439 million. For most films, this would represent success, but Warcraft's massive budget and marketing spend meant it might have barely broke even. Certainly not enough to justify sequels or a cinematic universe. And really, how crazy is it to launch a project where you know you have to make like $500 million just to break even? Hollywood is insane. Universal's reaction was swift and decisive. Within weeks of the domestic opening, studio executives quietly shelved sequel development. Duncan Jones had publicly discussed his vision for a multi-film arc exploring the broader Warcraft mythology. Those plans evaporated as quickly as the opening weekend box office numbers arrived. The franchise that was supposed to rival Marvel or Lord of the Rings was basically dead on arrival. Behind the scenes, recriminations flew. Studio executives blamed Jones for creating an inaccessible film that alienated mainstream audiences. Jones countered that studio interference had forced him to cut crucial character development in favor of action sequences. Legendary Entertainment found themselves caught between their director's artistic vision and Universal's commercial demands, ultimately satisfying neither. The most telling detail emerged months later when fans began discussing the mythical director's cut. Jones revealed in interviews that approximately 40 minutes of character development had been removed from his original assembly. Unfortunately, Jones has stated that there will never be a fully restored director's cut of his film. While the Blu-ray release adds in approximately 14 minutes of deleted scenes, the rest of the footage appears to be VFX heavy and will never be finished. By Christmas 2016, Warcraft had largely disappeared from theaters, leaving behind only the wreckage of franchise ambitions and the beginning of something unexpected. Cult following that would grow stronger than the original box office ever suggested. What happened next defied Hollywood logic. While Universal wrote off their losses and moved on to safer projects, something unexpected began brewing in online communities and home video markets. Warcraft started finding its audience. Not the massive mainstream crowd the studio had courted, but a dedicated fan base that appreciated what Jones had attempted to achieve. The film's cult resurrection began with its technical achievements. The orc designs, brought to life through cutting-edge motion capture, represented a genuine leap forward in fantasy filmmaking. Toby Kebbell's performance as Duratan delivered real emotion through layers of digital artistry, creating a character more compelling than many live-action heroes. The world building, while overwhelming in theaters, rewarded repeated viewings as fans discovered details and connections they had missed initially. Warcraft performed well on Blu-ray and digital platforms, suggesting audiences were more willing to engage with its complex mythology in their living rooms. The ability to pause, rewind, and process the dense lore made the film more accessible than its theatrical presentation had allowed. Gaming communities also helped lead this critical reassessment. Forums dedicated to World of Warcraft began highlighting moments where the film had captured the spirit of their beloved universe. The decision to make orcs sympathetic protagonists rather than just mindless villains earned praise from players who'd spent years exploring both sides of the faction conflict. Jones's respect for the source material, even when truncated by studio demands, resonated with fans tired of seeing their favorite properties dumbed down for mass consumption. Some critics began reassessing Warcraft within the broader context of video game adaptations. Compared to the cynical cash grabs that typically define the genre, Jones's sincere attempt to create prestige fantasy looked increasingly admirable. Some film academics started examining it as a case study in how studio interference could derail artistic vision, particularly in franchise filmmaking. The cult status grew stronger through streaming platforms. Netflix and Amazon Prime introduced Warcraft to audiences who'd missed its theatrical run. Without the pressure of ticket prices and theater time limits, these audiences engaged more generously with the film's ambitious scope. Meanwhile, international appreciation never really waned. Chinese audiences in particular continued celebrating Warcraft as a successful Western attempt to take fantasy seriously. Cult film fans placed it alongside other ambitious misfires like John Carter and Valerian, recognizing it as part of a tradition of box office failures that dared to dream big. Fan conventions had Warcraft panels where attendees discussed what worked, what didn't, and what might have been. Cosplayers embraced the film's character designs, particularly the elaborate orc costumes that showcased the movie's visual achievements. The film had found its people. Not the massive audience Universal wanted, but a passionate community that appreciated its sincerity. Modern fantasy filmmakers cite Warcraft as both a cautionary tale and inspiration. Its technical innovations influenced subsequent productions, while its narrative struggles provided lessons about balancing source material respect with mainstream accessibility. The film exists now as both monument to franchise ambition gone wrong and proof that audiences will eventually find movies that take their intelligence seriously, even when those movies stumble in the execution. In the end, Warcraft didn't just flop. It became a cautionary tale about studio panic and missed opportunities. A derailed franchise that somehow found new life as cult cinema's most expensive, beautiful failure. Duncan Jones created something genuinely ambitious that dared to treat video game source material with the same respect as literary adaptations, and watched it all collapse under the weight of commercial expectations and narrative compromise. The film's strange afterlife proves that sometimes the most interesting movies are the ones that don't quite work. Warcraft's cult following celebrates not just what it achieved, but what it attempted. A sincere, visually spectacular fantasy epic that refuses to condescend to its audience, even when that refusal guaranteed commercial disaster. Ready to perform another cinematic postmortem on a classic fantasy flick? Then be sure to check out my video on The Beastmaster. You'll find a link here on the screen. I hope to see you over there.
Ready, guys?
Let's do this. Leroy Jenkins!